Many people left Egypt with their feet, but still live in the Egypt of their minds. They are no longer chained by iron, yet remain imprisoned by fear, doubt, guilt, and memory. Egypt is not only a place, it is the symbol of anything we cling to for safety. But that ends up imprisoning our soul. It can be a job that drains us, a relationship we are afraid to let go of, or a habit that makes us forget we were born to be free. When Moses stood before Pharaoh, the voice of God did not speak only to a king. He spoke to every chain that binds the human heart, saying, "Let my people go." That same call still echoes through every life today, in the weary souls who have trapped themselves within their own walls. We often think freedom begins when everything around us changes, but the Bible shows the opposite. God did not start by breaking down the walls of Egypt. He began by awakening a man who was hiding in the wilderness, a man who had killed and carried shame for 40 years. He chose Moses, the one who no longer believed he could do anything, to become the vessel that would free an entire nation. Because before people can be set free, one person must first awaken. Each of us carries a calling like that. When God said, "Let my people go," he was also speaking to you. Let your mind stop serving false masters. Let your heart stop worshipping small idols. Let your true self step out of the shadows. Freedom does not begin when Pharaoh falls, but when Moses says yes. And the moment you say yes to the voice of God, the Egypt within you begins to crumble. Maybe you have asked, like Israel once did, if God could part the Red Sea, why has he not parted the sea of my life? If he spoke to Moses through the burning bush, why do I hear only silence? The answer is not found in thunder or miracles. It is found within that silence itself. Because when all noise fades, you can finally hear his voice. God does not always rescue by opening a way. Sometimes he rescues by making you stop, to realize that the prison is no longer locked, only that you have not stepped out yet. There are doors we keep asking God to open, but he is waiting for us to release our grip. Egypt cannot hold one who no longer clings to it. True freedom is not a change of place, but a change of faith. You may leave your past, yet still carry it, until you realize that God is calling you not to run away, but to return home. Exodus was never just their story. It is a mirror of our own. God is still calling in the midst of ordinary life, saying, "Let my people go, let your soul breathe, let your heart rest in me." For freedom is not when fear disappears, but when you know who walks with you through that fear. And that is the beginning of every journey of faith. Not the miracle, not the parted sea, but a whisper of surrender. Yes, Lord, from that moment, the journey out of Egypt begins, not by the strength of man, but by the grace of the one who promised that he is still delivering. Every great journey begins with a small moment. And sometimes that moment arrives when we no longer believe we are worthy to be chosen. Moses did not seek greatness. He was only running from his past. A man who once had everything in the palace, then lost it all in a single day. He had no honor, no power, no confidence left. Only an old man in the wilderness, tending sheep for someone else, convinced that his life was over. But it was in that forgotten place that God began to move. He did not appear among the golden walls of Egypt. He chose a bush, a small flame, to remind humanity that his presence does not need to be built in temples. It finds its way to the humblest places. The burning bush that did not burn out became a symbol of faith that can endure fire without being destroyed. Moses stepped closer, his bare feet touching the hot sand, and a voice called out from the fire. God said, "Moses, Moses," and he answered, "Here I am." In that moment, the world changed direction. A man who once fled became the one who was sent. A man who once took life became the bearer of redemption. When God calls, he does not choose the perfect. He chooses the humble. Have you ever felt like you were in that same wilderness, the place where you think every chance has passed, that God could use someone else more talented, braver, stronger than you? But what if the place where you are standing is holy ground? What if the silence that frightens you is the very moment he is about to call your name? Moses trembled. He said, who am I to go before Pharaoh? I do not speak well. I am not enough. But God never promised to make him stronger. He only promised, I will be with you. That is the answer to every fear the human heart has ever known. God does not look for those without fear. He looks for those who can listen within fear. And it is within that very weakness that grace begins its work. Maybe you are hearing these words while feeling weary, when it seems like God is silent. But remember, the burning bush was not a fire of destruction, but a fire of revelation. His silence does not mean his absence. Perhaps he is waiting for you to remove your shoes, to realize that the ground you are standing on has become holy because he is there. Let me ask you something. If you heard that call today, would you be willing to pause, not to answer right away, but simply to stand still and realize that God is speaking to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell about a time when you felt the presence of God in your life. Even for a small moment, I truly want to hear your story, because every time you share, I know my words have reached a real heart and that I am not speaking alone. That means more than any number ever could. It is proof that the Word of God is still alive, still reaching souls that long to be healed. Thank you for staying, for believing that the stories of the Bible are not ancient memories, but the breath of God still echoing through our time. My prayer is that as you listen again to the story of Moses, you will see this truth. God is never late. He does not forget those who run. He only waits for their hearts to be still enough to hear. Moses thought he had been forgotten, but God was preparing him for 40 years, for one single day, so that he could say, now go. And when he said that to Moses, he was saying it to you too. You may not feel ready, but grace does not wait for readiness. It only needs a heart that will answer. So if today you find yourself in the wilderness of your own life, remember that the bush is still burning. God is still calling your name. And in the very place you thought was the end, he may be beginning something new. The fire that burned without consuming was not just a sign, it was a revelation. When Moses asked, who are you? God answered, I am who I am. No name can define him. No image can contain him. That answer was both simple and earth-shaking, shaking the foundation of all human theology. In a world where every god had a name and a domain, only this one stood above every boundary. He was not the God of the sun or the river. He was being itself, the source of all that is alive. Every idol needs worshippers to exist, but he exists so that humanity may live. God's answer did not only tell Moses who he was, it reminded Moses who he was. Moses once sought his worth in the wisdom of Egypt, in strength and position, but all of that had fallen. Now, standing barefoot before the burning bush, he realized he had nothing left but the presence of God. And miraculously, that was enough. God did not need him to be strong. He needed him to be real. When God said, I have heard the cries of my people, and I have come down to deliver them, he did not send an angel or an army. He sent a shepherd who had failed. Why? Because true calling does not arise from confidence, but from surrender. Moses became the instrument because he knew he was unworthy. And it was in that very awareness that the power of God found space to be revealed. The world of Egypt believed in countless gods. Every river, every wind, every sun had its name and its sacrifice. Yet God identified himself with a statement that transcended all limits. I am. Those two words did more than deny every idol. They broke the bond between humanity and fear. If he is, then nothing else can be absolute. Every time we place power, wealth, or status at the highest place, we rebuild the gods of Egypt within us. And that same voice still echoes today as a reminder, do not turn good things into ultimate things, for only one is unchanging. Moses trembled when he heard his mission. He said, they will not believe me. They will ask for your name. What shall I say? And God answered, I am who I am. Tell them that the one who is has sent you. It was not a name to memorize, but a promise. The one who is, and who will always be present. Not a distant deity, but the one who would walk beside him through every step, every trial. God taught Moses that power is not in the hand holding the staff, but in the heart that obeys. When he said, throw it down, Moses saw it turn into a snake and grew afraid. When he said, take it back, he reached out and it became a staff again. That is the picture of faith. Each time we release what we believe keeps us safe. It may turn into something that frightens us. But when we take it back in trust, it becomes a tool of grace. Then God told him to put his hand inside his cloak. When he drew it out, it was leprous. He placed it back in. And when he took it out again, it was healed. Another sign, not just to convince the people, but to remind him that miracles begin in the heart. God did not only want to use Moses' hand, he wanted to touch his heart. Before he could touch others, he had to be healed of his own fear and guilt. Still Moses resisted. He said, Lord, please send someone else. But God did not withdraw his call. He simply said, Aaron will speak for you, but I will be with your mouth. In that, God taught that a calling is not a burden to be carried alone, but a partnership between grace and man. He does not demand perfection. He seeks willingness. When the bush finally dimmed and Moses returned home, he carried more than a mission. He carried the name of the one who spoke. In a world full of names, he bore a name that could not be fully spoken because it was not meant to be spoken, but lived. I am who I am means he will be all that his people need. When they fear, he will be peace. When they wander, he will be the way. When they hunger and thirst, he will be bread and water. The story of the burning bush did not end with a shout, but with the quiet steps of a man who had learned that the holiest thing is not found on a mountain or in a temple, but in walking with the everlasting one. And that is what allows every journey of faith to begin, not from power, but from presence. When Moses returned to Egypt, he was no longer the fleeing prince, nor the shepherd of Midian. He returned as a man carrying in his heart the flame from the burning bush, a fire that did not consume flesh but burned away fear. Egypt was still magnificent, still filled with the drums of rituals and the strength of power, but in the eyes of God, that empire was only a vast darkness waiting to be split open so that light could enter. Moses stepped into the palace where he had once lived, now returning with the staff of a shepherd and a message from heaven. He said, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says, let my people go. That declaration echoed through a hall lined with gold, among statues and magicians. Like a drop of water falling in the desert, Pharaoh laughed. Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? And in that laugh, the battle between heaven and earth began. This war was not fought with swords and spears, but with signs and wonders. Each plague was not a random act of wrath, but a message. God was not merely punishing, he was revealing the idols of mankind. When the Nile turned to blood, it was a message to the God of the river whom Egypt worshipped. When frogs swarmed, when dust became gnats, when livestock perished, when boils covered their skin. God was showing them that no God could sustain the order of life unless he allowed it. Every plague was a mirror, and in each mirror the world saw the fragility of human power. But what made the story profound was not the miracles, but the rhythm of the human heart. Each time Pharaoh seemed to yield, he hardened again. Amid Egypt's nights of darkness, amid the cries of its people, his heart remained closed. And the Bible says, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. That line has puzzled many, but it describes a spiritual law. When a person rejects light for too long, the darkness within becomes familiar. God does not force anyone to turn away. He simply allows them to walk the path they choose until that path closes behind them. Pharaoh was more than a man. He was the symbol of everything that makes our hearts shut against grace. Each time we say, I will handle it myself. I do not need anyone. I control everything. We stand beside him in that palace, facing God's invitation and refusing it. But God is patient. He does not break down doors. He knocks again and again, through winds, through quiet warnings, through moments when we meet the edge of our own strength. And in the midst of the confrontation, Moses still trembled. He did not stand like a hero, but like a man who knew his weakness and still chose to stand. He understood that victory was not in his shout, but in the presence of the one who sent him. When he raised his staff and the river turned red, when he prayed and the gnats disappeared, what mattered was not the result, but his faithfulness amid fear. God did not need him to be perfect. He needed him to remain faithful. The story of Pharaoh and Moses is not only about an ancient kingdom. It continues in every human heart. Each time we cling to power, pride, or anything that makes us believe we are untouchable, God still gently challenges them. He does not use a whip. He uses light. And though that light may sting, it is also the beginning of freedom. None of us are strangers to a hardened heart. Sometimes it happens after a wound, after a prayer unanswered, after a loss unhealed. We build walls, thinking we are keeping ourselves safe. But those very walls separate us from him. The story of Egypt reminds us that God is not afraid of those walls. He can touch them with a breeze, a drop of water, a whisper of awakening. As plague followed plague, the Egyptians began to see that life was no longer in their control. They saw clearly that idols could save no one. And amid the sorrow, one question echoed: who is the Lord? That question is the beginning of every journey of faith. Because when we start to ask, we have already begun to seek. Moses did not win through miracles, but through trust in the one who never changes. And in every person who bows before God, a part of Moses still lives. The one who stands in darkness, holding a simple staff, speaking for the light, saying, let my people go. Not only for a nation, but for every soul longing to be free. Aling awunyen bayeshur. That night, Egypt was wrapped in an unusual silence. No drums, no laughter, only a stillness so heavy it felt as though even the ground was holding its breath. In every Israelite home, lamps were lit, their trembling light falling upon door frames marked with the blood of a lamb. Inside each humble dwelling, fathers sat beside their children, holding cups of wine. Mothers broke unleavened bread, and every gaze turned toward the door. Outside, the darkness was passing by. Inside, a promise was being kept. When God said, when I see the blood, I will pass over you, he did not ask about status or merit. No one was saved because they were good enough. No one was forsaken because they were too weak. The only sign was the blood of the Lamb, a simple symbol, yet it carried the secret of redemption. In a world ruled by law and sin, where justice demands payment, God did not cancel the sentence. He bore it himself. The Passover night was not a celebration of the strong, but of the believing, trembling hands brushed blood upon the doors. Mothers held their children close, and prayers were whispered like breath. In every act there was fear, yet also a fragile faith that his word was true. And when the first cries rose from Egyptian homes, the people knew that God had kept his promise. Not a vague word, but a covenant carved into history with blood, with tears, and with mercy. Judgment and mercy walked together that night. God did nothing without purpose. Egypt's pain was not the amusement of divine power, but the judgment for evil that had long multiplied. Pharaoh had once cast the sons of the Hebrews into the river, and now the river seemed to weep in return. History was not blind punishment, but a mirror of justice. Yet even within justice, there was a door open for grace. The blood of the Lamb was that door. When dawn came, Egypt was filled with cries of mourning. But in the camp of Israel, a strange peace spread, not because they were better, but because they believed. They ate the unleavened bread. Drinking tears mixed with joy, they were not only spared from death, they were invited into new life. The blood on the door was not just a mark of that night, but a reminder that grace is always greater than judgment. Imagine this. As God passed through each house, he did not look inside to see who was perfect, who was righteous, or who prayed more. He only saw the blood. And when he saw the blood, he passed over. In the same way, when he looks upon the cross of Christ, he sees that blood covering us. And judgment passes over, not because we deserve it, but because his love chose it to be so. The Passover is not just a memory. It is an invitation. Each time we feel guilty, afraid, or unworthy, God reminds us that he has already passed over. Death is no longer the end. It has become the doorway into life, marked by the blood of the innocent one. This is not a faith to be understood, but a faith to be lived. When Pharaoh finally let go, the people departed in the night. They carried their belongings, their memories, and most of all, the sign that God had seen them, heard them, and come to deliver them. They left Egypt not only as the forgiven, but as the reborn. That night did not simply end slavery. It began a covenant between God and his people. That story still carries weight today. For each of us has a door that needs to be marked, a darkness that must be passed through, a call to freedom awaiting our answer. Sometimes redemption is not loud or radiant. It happens in a quiet room, when one person finally admits they need to be saved. And in that moment, God passes over once again. The Passover teaches us that true freedom is not escaping death, but knowing that we live within mercy. As dawn broke upon the rooftops, marked by lamb's blood, the people understood one thing: everything begins with faith. A small faith, just enough to obey, enough to step out, enough to believe that he promised, and he keeps his word. Because no judgment is stronger than that blood. No sin is deeper than that love. And no darkness is vast enough to keep God from passing over. When they left Egypt, the morning wind swept through the cloth, still carrying the scent of the night's smoke. Their first steps upon the sand were the steps of a people born into freedom, yet still learning how to live as the free. Before them lay the desert, behind them the thunder of Egyptian horses. Freedom had barely touched their lips when fear returned. And in that space between the sea and the army, they cried out, "Why did you bring us here to die?" Those words did not belong only to them. They still echo in every heart when faith is tested. God heard them, but he did not rebuke them. He called Moses to stand, not as a hero, but as a bridge between fear and faith. He said, "Stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord today." Those words rose above the wind like a breath of peace. Do not run. Do not fight. Just stand still. For there are battles that can only be won by stillness. Then the pillar of cloud moved, standing between the people and their enemies. To one side it gave light, to the other it brought darkness. God was not only leading, he was protecting. All that night the wind blew strong, dividing the sea, and the waters gathered like two great walls. No thunder, no lightning. Only a miracle performed by the patient breath of God. Imagine that moment. The wind roaring through their hair, water rising like transparent walls on both sides, dry ground beneath their feet. Each step a prayer, each breath a test. There were surely still doubters, still those who looked back, still children asking their fathers, will the water fall? Yet they walked on. For faith is not the absence of fear, but the courage to keep walking while fear remains. And when the last person stepped onto the far shore, God told Moses to raise his staff. The waters fell, the sea closed, and the sound of hooves vanished into the waves. No more Pharaoh, no more chains, no more past chasing them, only wind, light, and the cry of freedom. They did not shout in triumph. They sang the first song of a people who had just learned what it meant to be saved. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. This story always brings a quiet awe, because each of us has stood between the sea and the enemy, between the past and the future, between what was lost and what has not yet come. We too have asked, Lord, where do I go when before me is water and behind me is fear? And the answer remains the same. Stand still, and you will see God does not always remove fear. He teaches us to walk through it. The Red Sea is not just a miracle in history. It is a mirror of the soul. Each of us has a sea to cross, a fear to face, a wound to heal, a past to leave behind. And in the midst of waves that seem impossible, God still whispers, step forward. I have made dry ground for you. We were never promised a life without seas, but we were promised we would not walk alone. The miracle was not that the water parted, but that the human heart opened. They believed even without knowing how far the path would go. They walked, and each step became praise. When we dare to move into what seems impossible, faith ceases to be an idea and becomes breath itself. True faith does not erase fear. It turns fear into the ground where miracles grow. God did not lead them through the sea with the force of armies, but with the gentleness of wind. He did not shout to impress. He simply let his breath do what human power could not. And perhaps that is the greatest wonder of all, that divine power needs no display, because he is great enough to whisper. Today, if you find yourself standing between two shores, do not rush. The waters may not yet have parted, but the wind has begun to blow. You may not yet see the way, but the light has already fallen. God still does what he has always done, making a way where there is none, and leading you through not by might, but by love. When the sea grew calm, the people turned and looked back. The waters had covered all that was old. The past was buried in grace, and before them lay a new land. They walked on, not to escape, but to live fully for the one who had delivered them. The story of the Red Sea does not end with a shout, but with peace. For when God has parted the way for the soul, nothing can imprison it again. After the sea grew calm, the wind stopped, and the songs of victory faded. The desert appeared, vast, empty, no more sound of water, only the dry wind sweeping across the dune. The Israelites thought freedom was the end, but in truth, it was only the beginning. Freedom was not merely escaping chains, but learning to trust in the wilderness. Because sometimes the hardest part is not leaving Egypt, but letting Egypt leave your heart. 3 days under the sun, through sand and heat, with no water and no shade. Faith began to dry and crack like their lips. When they reached Marah, there was water, but it was bitter. They thought they had found what they longed for. But when they drank, the taste was sharp and choking. Isn't life often the same? When we finally touch what we have been yearning for, it disappoints us. When what we thought was the answer becomes another test. Moses cried out to God, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. A small miracle, quiet yet tender. That miracle whispered that no water is too bitter for him to make sweet again. Any pain, weariness, or resentment can be healed once it meets grace. God does not always remove the trial, but he can turn the trial itself into living water for the soul. After Marah came Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees. God not only healed, he provided abundance. He did not only soothe their wound, he taught them to rest. Because the journey of faith is not only about enduring, but also about pausing and breathing in grace. There are those who walk endlessly, forgetting that rest itself is part of the journey. But the desert returned again. Hunger replaced thirst. They grumbled, longing for the pots of meat in Egypt, forgetting the chains that once scarred their wrists. Yet once again, God did not grow angry. He made bread rain from heaven. Each morning, as the dew lifted, the ground was covered with something fine and delicate, like frost. They looked at each other and said, manna, meaning, what is it? That question held both wonder and confusion. Much like how we encounter grace, strange, silent, yet real. God told them to gather only enough for today. If they kept it, it would spoil, because grace was never meant to be stored. It is given fresh each day, every morning. They had to go out, bend down, and collect it bit by bit. Faith is the same. It cannot be hoarded for a lifetime. It must be lived one day at a time. God was not teaching them self-sufficiency. He was teaching them trust. Then came another thirst. Moses cried out, "What shall I do for these people?" God directed him to the rock at Rephidim and told him to strike it. And water poured out. A dry rock became a source of life. Paul would later say that rock was Christ. Indeed, he is the living water that flows even through our dryness. Life springing from what once seemed dead. When Amalek came to fight, the people trembled. Moses climbed the hill and raised his staff. When his hands grew weary, Aaron and Hur held them up. And when the sun set, Israel had victory. Then Moses built an altar and named it Jehovah Nissi, the Lord is my banner. A banner not waved in pride, but lifted in gratitude. For they saw that it was not strength or strategy that saved them, but the presence of the one among them, silent, yet near. Every detail in the wilderness carried a gentle reminder. When the water was bitter, he made it sweet. When they hungered, he gave bread. When they thirsted, he brought water from the rock. When they fought, he lifted tired hands. Everything they lacked, he filled. And through each moment, he taught them that grace is not just the miracle of rescue, but the daily breath of the journey. Perhaps today you are at Marah, where hope has turned bitter. Remember, the water may be bitter, but God is not. Or maybe you are at Elim, a place of rest you fear losing. Learn to rest, for peace too is an act of trust. Or perhaps you are at Rephidim, weary, struggling, exhausted. Remember, the Lord is still your banner, and there are unseen hands holding you up when you cannot stand. The wilderness is where humanity becomes small, but God becomes near. There we learn to live not by Egypt, not by storage, not by our plans, but by grace new every morning, enough for today, and always gentler than we think. 3 months after leaving Egypt, they came to the foot of Mount Sinai. No more sound of waves, no more pounding of hooves, only the wind brushing across the rocks and thunder rolling faintly from the mountain's peak. Before them stood the towering mountain, wrapped in thick cloud and fire. God said to Moses, "Come up to me, for I have something to say to my people." And within that wind, a new covenant was about to be formed, not between a king and slaves, but between a father and his children. God said, "You have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you will be my treasured possession among all nations, a kingdom of priests, a holy people." Imagine that. A people once despised, once beaten, now called precious. Their freedom was not only release from bondage, but a calling to become light. Then God told Moses, "Prepare the people. They must wash their garments, purify themselves, and be ready. For in 3 days the Lord would descend, not as a distant deity, but as one who draws near." It is strange and beautiful. Grace always walks with holiness. God did not only want to be among them, he wanted them pure enough to feel his presence, not because he is distant, but because his love is too holy to be received by a polluted heart. On the 3rd day, the ground shook, thunder roared, smoke covered the peak, and the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. The people trembled, clutching one another's hands. Children hid in their mothers' robes. The elderly bowed low. No one dared approach, for in the fire and smoke, they saw something they had never known before: power joined with love. They had known a God who saves. Now they saw a God who is holy. And in that trembling, they learned that freedom does not mean absence of boundaries. Moses climbed upward. His figure faded into the cloud, small against the lightning and smoke. Every step he took symbolized human courage drawing near to the unseen. There, at the summit of Sinai, God spoke the 10 Commandments, not to bind, but to shape, not to restrict, but to protect. Every word he spoke was more than law. It was a reflection of his very nature. "You shall have no other gods before me." That was not a command of exclusion, but an invitation to stop chasing what cannot save. It was a reminder that only I am enough for you. "You shall not make idols," not because God feared replacement, but because he knew our tendency to shrink him into forms we can control. But true love cannot be confined to wood, and grace cannot be imprisoned in ritual. "You shall not misuse my name." This was not only about speech, but about living. Each time we live dishonestly, claiming to be his children, yet acting as if he does not exist, we wound his name. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy, in a world that never stops running. This was the command to pause. God did not command rest for laziness, but so that humanity could learn to be human again. Slaves work without end, but the free know when to stop. Trusting that the world still turns even when they do not, the remaining commandments flow down the mountain like water, guiding life into order and love. Honor your father and mother. Do not kill. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness. Do not covet. Each began from compassion, from respect for life, from love anchored in discipline. But when Moses brought the words down, the people trembled. They said, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But do not let God speak to us, or we will die." And Moses answered, "God has come to test you, so that the fear of him will keep you from sinning." That fear was not to enslave them, but to anchor them. Reverence does not destroy freedom, it protects it from becoming chaos. God wanted his people not only to know his power, but to know he is worthy of awe. That day, amid thunder and flame, humanity heard the voice of God directly for the first time. No mediator, no ritual, only the living word touching their ears and their hearts. And the most miraculous thing of all was that though they were afraid, they were allowed to stay. God did not use his power to push them away, but his love to draw them near. And that is the heart of Sinai. He is exalted yet intimate, holy yet present, righteous yet merciful. That mountain did not tremble only with thunder, but with the rhythm of human hearts beating for the first time in harmony with the voice of their Creator. While Moses stayed on the mountain and the cloud of glory covered Sinai for 40 days, the people at the foot of the mountain grew restless. The mountain blazed with fire at night and smoked by day, but they no longer felt his presence. Only silence. They asked each other, is Moses still alive? Has the Lord left us? And in that fear, they did what people always do when they can no longer hear God. They created idols to replace him. They went to Aaron, the one who had once stood beside Moses during great miracles, and said, make for us a god to lead the way. Aaron did not refuse. He gathered their golden earrings, melted them down, and shaped a calf. When the gold gleamed under the sun, the camp shouted, this is the God who brought us out of Egypt. How bitter it was that with the same mouths which once sang to the Lord, they now praised the image made by their own hands. But idols are not only gold. An idol is anything we hold tighter than God. It could be work, someone we love, a dream, even fear itself, anything we cannot let go of. We have already placed upon the throne. And like Israel, whenever God seems silent, we fill the emptiness with what makes us feel safe. Even if only for a while on the mountain, God said to Moses, go down, for your people have corrupted themselves. They have made a calf and are bowing before it. Moses carried the 2 tablets written by the hand of God, filled with the words of life and the covenant of love. But as he descended, he saw chaos, music, dancing, wine, and shouting. His eyes filled with tears. He threw the tablets to the ground, breaking them. It was not only stone that shattered, but the image of the covenant just betrayed. Amid the ashes, God's anger burned. Yet within his wrath came a pause, a prayer. Moses looked up and said, if you will not forgive them, then erase my name from the book of life. A man willing to lose himself to save others. That prayer rose to heaven, and God's fury turned to mercy. He said, I will go with you, for I know you by name. In that moment, we see the deepest truth about God. He is not only the judge, he is the forgiver. He did not destroy his people. He renewed his covenant. He did not withdraw from them. He rewrote what was broken. God told Moses to carve 2 new tablets, and he wrote the same words again. It was a picture of mercy, that when people break what is sacred, God still chooses to write again. Then Moses prayed, show me your glory. And God said, you will see me pass by, but you cannot see my face, for no one may see my face and live. God placed Moses in a cleft of the rock, covered him with his hand. And as he passed, he said, I am the Lord, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, full of love and faithfulness, not thunder, not fire, but a gentle voice full of compassion. God revealed his heart, righteous yet merciful. When Moses came down, his face shone so brightly that the people were afraid. They could not look directly at him, for the light was the reflection of the one he had met. Moses covered his face when he spoke to them and removed the veil only when standing before the Lord. It was a sign of what was to come, that people could not yet bear his full glory until grace was revealed completely through Christ. Paul later wrote, "When people read Moses, a veil covers their hearts. But when they turn to the Lord, the veil is removed." The glory of Sinai made people bow down, but the glory of Christ lifts people up. Moses had to cover his face, but we are invited to look straight at grace without fear. The story of the golden calf is not only their failure, it is the mirror of humanity. Even after being saved, we forget. Even after hearing his word, we still create idols to feel safe. But God remains patient. He still rewrites the tablets of our hearts, still calls us back when we wander, still shines through souls that once fell. Perhaps you too have lost something sacred, turned away, or been broken. But remember, God does not discard broken pieces. He uses them to tell the story of mercy. Every crack is a place where his light can enter. Every failure is an opening for grace to grow deeper. So do not fear your fall. Moses saw his people fall, and God still chose to stay. He still does. He still writes upon broken hearts. He still shines through faces once afraid. And perhaps it is only when we have nothing left to boast of that he begins to carve upon us the eternal words of his love. After all, the Red Sea, the desert, the fire and the smoke, the Israelites kept walking. But this time, they carried not only memories of miracles, but a promise that God would dwell among them. And he did something beyond human understanding. Instead of remaining on the mountain surrounded by cloud and fire, he chose to come down and live among them, inside a tent made by human hands. He said to Moses, "Build me a dwelling place so that I may live among them, not in a palace, not in a temple of stone, but in a simple, moving tent, just like their wandering lives." It was the sign of a humble love, a mighty God choosing closeness instead of distance. An eternal one walking beside people who often changed. That tent was called the tabernacle. At its center was the Ark of the Covenant, covered in gold, containing 3 symbols: the stone tablets of the law, Aaron's staff that had budded, and a jar of manna. Each one told a part of the story between God and his people: justice, power, and care. But the most wondrous part was the cover of the ark, a golden seat called the mercy seat. There, once a year, the high priest would sprinkle the blood of sacrifice to atone for the sins of the people. Between law and sin, God placed love. Between justice and judgment, he placed mercy. Everything was arranged with care. Lamps, tables, curtains, incense, priestly garments, each detail speaking the language of presence. It was more than architecture. It was an invitation. God was saying to them, "I am here among you." He did not wait for them to come close. He came first. It was not they who made a place for him, but he who chose to dwell with them. Imagine the moment the tabernacle was finished. The people stood all round. Moses looked up, and the cloud of glory descended. The light was not blinding, but warm, like dawn touching the sand. God was no longer distant on the mountain. He was in their midst. In every step, every night, every breath. When the cloud stopped, they stopped. When the cloud moved, they moved. No map was needed, only trust. From then on, God went with them through the journey as a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. The cloud was not only a sign, but a tender reminder that even though they were weak, he was faithful, even when they complained, doubted, and forgot. He did not leave. In every pause, In every desert wind, he whispered through the flame, I am still here. And as with all things in the Old Testament, the tabernacle was not only about the past, it pointed to what was coming when the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Jesus himself became the living tabernacle. He did not dwell in a tent of fabric, but in a human body. No incense or lamps or lambs were needed anymore, for he was the fragrance, the light, and the perfect sacrifice. On the cross, he became the true mercy seat, where law and love met, where justice was fulfilled through grace. But there is something deeper still. After he ascended, we became the new tabernacle. Paul wrote, you are the temple of God, and his Spirit lives within you. The same glory that once shook Sinai, that made Moses veil his face, now lives in the heart. God no longer dwells in tents. He dwells within souls. Every breath, every prayer, every moment of silence can become a meeting place with him. That changes everything. If God is within us, we no longer have to climb mountains to find him, nor wait for miracles to prove his presence. We only need to pause, to breathe, to whisper quietly, Lord, I know you are here. And the moment we do, peace begins to descend like the cloud once covering the camp. That is the end of Exodus, yet truly the beginning of a new story. For every journey of faith follows the same chapters: rescued, tested, taught, forgiven, and finally brought into presence. It is the journey every soul must take, from slavery to freedom, from fear to peace, from distance to closeness. When you look back on your life, you may see it too. The Red Sea moments, the deserts of Mara, the mountains of Sinai, and the times you broke like shattered tablets. But through it all, one thing has never changed. God has walked with you. He has chosen to stay, to dwell within the most fragile parts of your humanity. And perhaps that is the most beautiful miracle of all, that the Creator of the universe desires to live in the heart of an ordinary person, not through thunder or fire, but through a gentle presence, like breath, like light, like a love that never leaves. When you pause and look back after this journey, remember that the story of Exodus is not just an ancient memory of one nation. It is the reflection of every soul's path, from slavery to freedom, from fear to trust, from wandering to resting in the presence of God. Every step you take, no matter how small, how heavy, or how silent, is part of the gentle plan He is writing for your life. God does not ask you to be perfect for Him to dwell with you. He only asks that you open your heart. Just as He once chose the Israelites, He does not choose the strongest. He chooses those who are willing to listen, to pause and to say, Lord, I am here. And the moment you say those words, the road ahead will no longer feel empty. If today you find yourself in your own wilderness, a place of dryness, weariness, and uncertainty, trust that God is still walking beside you. You may not feel it, but He is there in every breath, in every tear, in every small effort to keep going. He is still the God of the Red Sea, still the God of the cloud and the fire, still the God who chooses to dwell among His people, even in their weakest moments. Hold on to faith, even if it is as small as a grain of sand in your hand. Live each day as if God Himself is walking with you, because He truly is. Forgive when you can, love when it is hard, and stay silent when words fail. It is in those moments that you are learning to live as one who has been redeemed, not by miracles, but by grace. Thank you for walking this journey with me through the pages of Scripture, through the lessons of Moses, and through the miracles God has done. Thank you for giving your time, your attention, and your heart to listen to the living word. I pray that God grants you and your family peace in your hearts, strength in your bodies, and light for every step ahead. Keep walking, even if slowly, but do not stop, for God is still guiding you. Each day, each breath, each step toward the place He has promised. May you stay strong. Keep your faith and live in the gentle peace of the one who has chosen to dwell with you today, tomorrow, and forever.